Hi, this is Mr. Evans. This video is going to look at a question that I have posed, which I would imagine could be a question at the end of paper 1 at A-level, one of those 25-mark questions. And the question is, to what extent is growth always beneficial to a public limited company? Now, I've written this answer by hand because I wanted to reflect what you would have to do. So I put a timer on my phone once I'd written the question, and everything else that you see, apart from this question here, was written in 25 minutes in timed conditions. So I've started off with a plan for what I would want to cover during the essay. So I've just put some of the advantages of growth, some of the disadvantages of growth, and some evaluation points that I might want to come back to. The examiner says in all of the reports it's good to plan the essay before you start. So let's have a look at how I have tried to answer this question. To what extent is growth always beneficial to a public limited company? And whenever you see this word always, the answer is never going to be always. So in other words, you will want some balance and nuance if you want to get into those higher marks. So I've started my essay with this paragraph. Business growth can occur organically when an organisation funds its expansion from internal sources, or externally when growth occurs through merger and takeover activity. The extent to which it would benefit a public limited company, PLC, could be judged by its impact on the company's profits, dividend payments and share price. So what have I done in this opening paragraph? Well, maybe some examiners would argue that I've not really started answering the question yet, but what I've done is I've identified that there are different types of growth, and I've said how we're going to judge whether or not it is beneficial, use the word benefit there, to a public limited company. So I've covered a bit of knowledge about growth, and I've also explained how we're going to judge, how we're going to evaluate whether it would be beneficial to a public limited company. So that's why I've chosen to start like that. I should at least get some knowledge marks for those points. And the other thing that I've done is I'm going to come back. So one of the evaluation points that I wrote down in my plan is it depends on the method of growth. And that's what I'm laying out here. I'm going to come back to this point about organic growth in my conclusion. So this opening paragraph at least sets the shape for my essay, and there's a bit of symmetry with my conclusion right at the end. So let's see how I have structured the rest of the essay. By the way, I do apologise for my handwriting. I know it's not the best, but hopefully by putting myself in your position of having 25 minutes to answer a question, this means that this essay is a bit more realistic than ones I type out on the computer, because I can type much faster than I can write. So business growth can be beneficial for PLCs because it may allow them to drive down their average costs of production. This is because they may benefit from economies of scale as a result of their growth. For example, they may be able to negotiate cheaper prices with suppliers for raw materials, purchasing economies, or employ specialist workers in different functional areas, managerial economies, or use their size to borrow money at a lower interest rate, financial economies. So all I've done really in this opening few lines of this paragraph is I've explained to the examiner that I've got a really quite good understanding of what economies of scale are, and I've given some examples to back that up. If growth allows a PLC to reduce its average cost of production, it should increase their profit margin on each unit sold. This could increase the profit a PLC makes, allowing them to increase dividend payments and possibly raising the share price. So now I've developed a chain of argument explaining that we can benefit from economies of scale, lower cost of production, higher profit margins, and linked back to the fact that a PLC will be judged on these things here. So there's a nice little reflection of how I've said we're going to judge whether a PLC benefits. demonstrating that operating on a bigger scale can increase efficiency thanks to lower average costs and therefore be beneficial to a PLC. So hopefully I've linked it back to the question. However, this may depend on the amount of growth that a business experiences. So this paragraph was, the first paragraph was looking at economies of scale, why they might benefit, why growth may benefit a PLC. Now I'm going to say what that depends on and try and get some evaluation. However, this may depend on the amount of growth that a business experiences. It could be that a PLC reaches the point of maximum efficiency, beyond which diseconomies of scale may set in. For example, bigger businesses become more difficult to coordinate due to their increase in size and the issues of clearly communicating with all staff. British Airways are an example of a company that operates across different time zones, employing people speaking a range of languages and therefore increasing the costs of communication. These are known as diseconomies of scale because they raise average costs and make PLCs more difficult to run. So I've included a little bit of context there, an example to back up my point. Operating across different time zones, employ people speaking in a range of languages, that's going to increase costs of communication, which increase average costs, making PLCs more challenging to run. So hopefully I've explained why a PLC may benefit from economies of scale as a result of growth, but we're going to get to a point where diseconomies of scale set in, and I've explained why that might be difficult, why it might not benefit a PLC, backed up with an example to give me some context. So now I'm going to have a look at different types of growth. Business growth may also allow a company to reduce the risks that they face. Okay, so a nice little statement to preface this paragraph. For example, a strategy of vertical integration may allow a PLC to control their supply chain, reducing the chances of fluctuations in the price of their raw materials. The strategy of diversification allows a business to sell new products to new customers, therefore reducing the impact of changes in demand on their core product. Okay, so you could argue that I should really link this back a bit more carefully to the question, but I've looked at how different types of business growth, i.e. vertical integration, diversifying into new markets, referencing Ansoff here, how that would benefit a company. Perhaps I should more clearly have linked this to the profits of a PLC, but hopefully the examiner can see what I'm getting at. However, such strategies come with inherent risks. Vertical integration and diversification both involve a company moving into markets that they do not know and are not their core competence. Tesco have followed a strategy of retrenching from business ventures that are not their core competence of UK groceries by selling off overseas operations in the US and South Korea and the Giraffe restaurant chain in the UK. So this is true. Tesco in sort of the 2000s acquired quite a few businesses that were outside of their core competence. Tesco are really, really, really good in the UK grocery market. They're excellent at running a UK business, but when they diversified into the US and South Korea and other companies like Giraffe and Dobby's Garden Centres, the current management team felt that they were losing their focus on what they're really good at. This demonstrates some of the risk of growing by diversifying, because at the same time, Tesco have moved rapidly into the online and convenience store sector. Showing the least risky type of growth for a PLC may be organic growth, focused on developing an organisation's core competence. So I was running out of time by this point, and maybe this chain of analysis isn't as clear as it should be, but what I'm trying to say is that Tesco are an example of a company that diversified outside of their core competence, and as a result they had to follow a strategy of retrenchment, or they chose to follow a strategy of retrenchment because they were trying to do things that they're not really good at. But at the same time as retrenching, Tesco were consolidating their position in the UK grocery market through growing their convenience store, Tesco Express, Tesco Metro, etc., and moving into online because they wanted to refocus on their core competence. And that shows that Tesco are an example of a company that have decided to focus on using organic growth rather than mergers and acquisitions outside of their sort of key market. So now I need a conclusion, and I got to this point and I had 3 minutes or so left. So I kind of knew what I wanted to say in my conclusion. And a good conclusion, remember, will include a clear answer to the question, some support for the answer, and maybe some balance, identifying a problem with our conclusion, and if we're really able to, putting in a solution too. That should cover most of the rubric which is on the examiner's descriptor of a level 5 answer. So in conclusion, I believe that growth is beneficial for public limited companies when it is organic growth that is well planned and concentrated on exploiting an organisation's core competence. Okay, so there's my answer to the question. Growth is beneficial when it's well planned and concentrated on exploiting their core competence. I've written that is because this is the least risky sort of growth and the most likely to generate profits for shareholders. So hopefully my explanation links clearly to the context of the question, which is PLCs. However, organic growth may be too slow to satisfy the desire of some shareholders for short-term growth and large dividend payments. So here's a problem with my conclusion. Organic growth can be slow rather than external growth, which can be much quicker. Therefore, it is important for the board to present shareholders with a clear plan for controlled and sustainable long-term growth. All right, it's not the best solution to this problem, but what I'm trying to get across is that if the board of a public limited company can explain to their shareholders why they're choosing slow organic growth for the long term, then that will be the most beneficial for a PLC. What I was trying to actually get in, and I was in time conditions, I was trying to get in something about profit satisficing, maybe the best long-term strategy for a PLC, in other words, focusing on the demands of all stakeholders when they are growing. But I couldn't quite get that in time conditions. Hopefully you can see how I've shown some knowledge in this, how I've backed up my examples with some backed up my points with some business examples to show application. I've developed chains of analysis throughout that have been balanced, looked at both sides of the argument, and I've come to a clear conclusion that's answered the question, to what extent is growth always beneficial to a public limited company?